a matter of time. I want my people to be free, to be free, to be free. The sun still shines. The sun still shines.
Right, let's jump right in today. We're going deep on episode 6 of the It's a Matter Time podcast, talking about Sanfilo's book, Life Ain't Fair, and really making the case for reforming Florida's justice system. So we're going to unpack all that, why Florida's system needs an overhaul. Plus, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of Philo's proposed legislation for change.
Right, and it's not just theoretical. I mean, the book's got a whole appendix with references, actual draft legislation.
Yeah, he's not messing around.
Yeah.
Okay, so right off the bat, the podcast drops this crazy stat. Between 1990 and 2009, Florida's average sentence length, get this, increased by 166%.
Wow.
More than any other state.
Yeah, no wonder Florida's prisons are so overcrowded. They're packed with aging inmates because of these long sentences.
Right, and it's got to be expensive too.
Oh, absolutely. Caring for older inmates is a huge financial burden on taxpayers.
Makes sense.
The Florida Department of Corrections secretary even said it. Julie L. Jones, yeah. She called the rising elderly inmate population and the costs one of the biggest challenges the FDOC faces.
Oh.
And here's the thing. Older inmates are statistically less likely to reoffend, but they cost more to keep in prison.
It's kind of counterintuitive.
It is. The podcast also brought up Florida's parole success rate.
Okay.
It's 97.5%. Florida's got over 13,600 people serving life without parole, highest in the nation.
Wow, that's a life
And
trouble.
44% of them, they weren't even convicted of murder.
Wait, what? 44% of lifers didn't commit murder?
Nope. So it makes you think about what a life sentence actually means.
It does. Are these super long sentences, almost like virtual life sentences? Or are those just a Florida thing?
The U.S. is definitely doing its own thing compared to a lot of countries, especially in Europe. The European Court of Human Rights, they actually ruled that whole life sentences without parole review are unconstitutional.
So if you're facing one of these long sentences, the idea of spending the rest of your life in prison, how do people even deal with that?
Well, research shows a lot of lifers actually become model prisoners.
Really?
Yeah, they help create a stable prison environment and mentor younger inmates.
Interesting. So there's hope for rehabilitation even with long sentences. But does this harsh system actually prevent crime?
Crime's been declining across the U.S. for decades now.
Okay.
And that's with states having all sorts of different approaches to sentencing. So tougher sentences don't automatically equal less crime. Some research even suggests focusing on rehabilitation might be more effective in reducing crime.
So maybe the focus should be less about punishment and more about helping people get their lives back on track.
Yeah.
And that's where Philo's book comes in. He doesn't just point out the problems. He offers concrete legislative solutions in that appendix.
That's what makes it so interesting.
Now let's dive into some of those proposals.
Okay.
He suggests renaming the punishment code to the Florida Public Safety Code. What do you think? Can a simple name change actually make a difference?
I think it's more than symbolic. It reflects a shift in thinking, right?
Okay.
From pure retribution to a more holistic approach. Like, if we're really aiming for a safer society, maybe the focus should be on rehabilitation and reintegration along with consequences.
Right, makes sense.
What else does Philo propose?
There's the REAP Act.
REOP Act.
Stands for Rehabilitation, Evaluation, and Assessment Protocol.
Oh, okay.
It's about setting clear standards for what counts as rehabilitation.
Right, because we were talking about how parole can feel arbitrary.
Exactly. The REAP Act aims to create a more transparent and fair system.
That's important, especially if it eases public concern about releasing potentially dangerous people. It's about finding that balance between being compassionate and holding people accountable.
Absolutely. And Philo doesn't stop there. He's also got this idea for the Discretionary Sentencing Reform Act.
Okay.
It would give prosecutors more leeway to modify sentences.
Especially for people doing really long time. Like if someone shows they're truly remorseful and making progress toward rehabilitation, the system could acknowledge that.
And maybe adjust their sentence.
Exactly.
Well,
plus, it could help with that prison overcrowding problem.
Right, so a more just system and cost savings, potentially. What else?
Okay, this one's got a catchy name. The School Act. It's the Second Chance Housing Opportunities for Offenders with LWOP Act.
School Act, love it.
It tackles the issue of Florida handing out the most life without parole sentences in the country.
I remember that stat.
His solution is pretty bold.
What's he suggesting?
Creating communities specifically for people transitioning out of prison after those super long sentences.
Like whole communities.
Yeah, second chance communities.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, he argues it could actually save the state a ton of money.
Seriously?
He's talking between $168 and $329 million annually.
Wow. How would that even work?
It's all about lowering incarceration costs, providing housing, support, maybe even job training in these communities. You could collect fees, maybe get restitution payments. Plus, residents could do community service. It's this whole multifaceted approach that benefits both the individual and the state.
Okay, the School Act is definitely intriguing. But what about those elderly inmates? The ones who are less of a risk but need a lot of medical care. Does Philo address that?
He does. He's got the Compassionate Release for Elderly Offenders Act.
Okay.
It acknowledges that keeping elderly inmates locked up, especially if they're not a danger, is both inhumane and expensive.
I can see that.
So it proposes this system for granting compassionate release to qualifying elderly offenders. It would free up resources, help with overcrowding, and those individuals could get better care outside prison.
So more humane treatment and potential cost savings. Philo's really thought this through.
He has. And he actually has more proposals, too.
I bet.
They all aim to promote fairness, rehabilitation, and a more effective way of handling public safety.
Wow, we've covered a ton already. From shocking statistics to really innovative proposals that challenge how we think about justice.
We have. Philo's book raised some really important questions about Florida's justice system.
It's amazing how much Philo covers in just one chapter, you know? He doesn't just complain about the system, he offers solutions.
Right. And he's got these really creative ideas targeted at specific issues. Like he proposes the Florida Restitution and Community Reinvestment Review Committee Act.
Okay.
It basically says the current system, with all its emphasis on punishment, it might not be doing enough to help victims or communities actually heal.
Makes sense. A crime affects more than just the offender.
Exactly. So this act, it wants to create a committee to look at how restitution works. Is it really effective? It wants to explore different approaches that could serve victims better and, improve community well-being.
So it's about shifting the focus from punishing to, healing and repairing. Is there a connection between this and the restorative justice idea we talked about?
Definitely. Restorative justice is all about repairing the harm and rebuilding relationships instead of just punishing.
Right.
Imagine, instead of just focusing on punishment, you bring the victim, the offender, maybe even people from the community together to address the impact of the crime and find ways to move forward.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, and it fits with Philo's idea of moving beyond just punishment and looking for these more holistic and transformative solutions.
So it's about acknowledging that justice isn't just about locking people up, it's about dealing with the harm. Speaking of rehabilitation, Philo also proposes the Florida Corrections Rehabilitative Program Evaluation Committee Act. What's the thinking behind that one?
Well, we've got all these rehab programs in prisons, but are they working?
Right.
Are they doing what they're supposed to?
Yeah.
This act wants to evaluate those programs, make sure they're actually making a difference.
So they're not just going through the motions.
Exactly. And the act points to some really innovative programs that are already happening. Things like the Regina B. Shern and FIU Lifers program at Everglades, the GEO and FAU Civics Enrichment Education Program, and the Jack Brewer Heroes Second Chance Fatherhood Initiative at South Bay.
Those sound fantastic.
They do. It's great to see people actively trying to create positive change inside the prison system. But, are we tracking how well these programs are working?
Yeah, that's what the act is all about.
Yeah.
Measuring their impact, right? Looking at recidivism rates.
Yeah.
Seeing how well offenders are rehabilitated, especially those serving long sentences. We got to make sure we're investing in programs that actually work.
Exactly. And this is where a data-driven approach comes in. We need to be smart about how we're allocating resources. It seems like a lot of Philo's proposals are about this more nuanced, evidence-based approach to criminal justice. It's not about being tough on crime, it's about being smart about it.
You're right. And that leads us to another proposal. The Victim Services and Offender Accountability Evaluation Committee Act.
Oh, yeah.
This one recognizes that both victims and offenders are part of the healing and rehabilitation process.
Exactly. It's not just about punishing the offender, it's also about supporting the victim as they heal.
Right.
The act wants to look at some pretty innovative victim services. Things like mediation, offender accountability meetings. These approaches have shown a lot of promise in helping people heal and promoting that restorative justice idea.
We've talked about restorative justice in theory, but are there any real-life examples where it's actually worked?
Oh, definitely. There are cases where victims have actually sat down with the person who harmed them, asked questions, expressed their pain, heard the offender's remorse. It's not easy, but these encounters can be really powerful. They can help both sides find closure and move on.
That's so incredible. It's about acknowledging the human side of crime and finding a way to deal with it that leads to understanding and healing.
Absolutely. And that lines up with Philo's vision of a more humane and effective justice system. And while we're talking about looking at existing practices, we should talk about the Life Without Parole Reform Evaluation Committee Act.
Right, we were saying how Florida really likes to hand out those LWOP sentences.
Yeah, and this act wants to form a committee to study the costs and benefits of changing how we do LWOP, weighing the pros and cons, thinking about different approaches, making sure we're not just sticking with a system that's outdated or maybe even counterproductive.
It's a really thorough way to look at it. Instead of just assuming things, you're gathering evidence and thinking about the best way forward.
Exactly. Informed decisions based on data and analysis. And kind of along the same lines, there's another proposal inspired by federal legislation, the Florida First Step Committee Act.
Oh, the First Step Act. That was a pretty big deal a few years ago. Remind me what it was about.
It was this bipartisan criminal justice reform bill focused on reducing recidivism and promoting rehabilitation, expanded early release programs, offered more education and job training for inmates. It tried to address those harsh sentencing practices that led to mass incarceration.
So it was all about giving people a second chance and trying to stop that cycle of crime.
Exactly. And this Florida First Step Committee Act wants to create a committee to study what would happen if we implemented similar reforms here in Florida. What are the potential benefits? What challenges might we face?
That's a smart approach. If it works somewhere else, why not learn from it?
Right. Learn from what works and adapt it to Florida's needs. It's about being open to new ideas and realizing there might be better ways to reach our goals.
Yeah.
And speaking of second chances, what about Philo's proposal to establish second chance integrity units in Florida? What are those?
What are those? Yeah.
Okay, so they would be in charge of assessing the long-term effects of being in prison, and they'd identify inmates who are truly rehabilitated and not a danger to the public anymore. The cool part is they want law students to be involved.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right. Gives the students real-world experience, shows them different sides of the justice system, brings new perspectives to the table.
Everyone wins. Students get experience, and the system gets fresh energy and new ideas. So these integrity units would evaluate inmates and make recommendations, and then what?
The proposal suggests giving state and district attorneys the power to actually change sentences based on what these units recommend.
That's a big change. It recognizes that people can change, that the system needs to be flexible enough to see that change and adjust sentences because...
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between accountability and compassion and understanding that people can change, even in prison.
It's a powerful message. It's seeing that potential for redemption even in people who've made big mistakes.
And speaking of redemption, we got to talk about Philo's Emerging Adult Resentencing Act.
Okay, so this one focuses on a specific group, right?
Yeah, it deals with what we call emerging adults, people between 18 and 25.
Okay.
There's more and more research showing that their brains are still developing during those years, especially the parts responsible for impulse control and decision-making.
Right, so they're not fully formed adults yet.
Right. And this act acknowledges that first-time offenders under 21, when they committed their crime, maybe they deserve a second chance. They have so much potential for rehab and growth.
Yeah, they're young.
We need to consider their age and not judge them by the same standards as fully developed adults.
So instead of just punishing them for a mistake made when their brains were still growing, this act wants a more understanding approach.
Right. That's where resentencing comes in. It allows us to look at these emerging adult sentences again, consider their circumstances and how much they've changed since they were first convicted.
It's giving them a chance to show they've learned and they're ready to contribute to society.
Do you think this could really impact recidivism rates? There's a good chance, yeah. Studies show young people given a second chance and provided with support, they're much less likely to reoffend.
Makes sense. It's about understanding that people can change and that early intervention can make a huge difference. What about those emerging adults sentenced to life without parole? Does Philo have anything for them?
He does. He proposes the Emerging Adult Parole Opportunity Act.
Okay.
It acknowledges that a life sentence without parole might be too harsh for someone whose brain wasn't even fully developed when they committed the crime.
So it's giving them a shot at parole, even if they weren't supposed to get it originally?
Exactly. The act would put the Florida Commission on offender review in charge of conducting those parole reviews, making sure they're fair and focused on public safety and rehab.
Seems like a balanced approach. It's not about just letting everyone go. It's about evaluating each case and deciding if there's still a danger.
Right. And it reflects our growing understanding of brain development. Our brains keep developing into our 20s. And young people who mess up, even seriously, they can still change and grow.
They're not the same person they were then.
Exactly. And when we recognize that potential for change, we can build a justice system that's more humane, more effective, more fair, more focused on rehabilitation.
Wow. We've gone from restitution and restorative justice to evaluating rehab programs and exploring all these new approaches to sentencing.
We have, and Philo doesn't stop there. He has even more proposals that challenge us to really rethink our assumptions and explore new possibilities in criminal justice reform.
Philo really packed this book with ideas. Every page is like, boom, another solution, another thing to think about.
He really knows the system, and he wants to fix it.
Yeah. And one of the biggest ideas we talked about was the Second Chance Communities Act.
Oh, right.
Can you remind me what that was all about?
Sir, it's the proposal to build whole communities specifically for people coming out of prison after long sentences, especially those who got life without parole.
Right. It's not just giving them a place to live, it's giving them support to get back on their feet.
Exactly. Think about it. Job training, counseling, maybe substance abuse treatment, help finding a permanent place to live, connecting them with mentors. It recognizes that after years, maybe decades in prison, they need help adjusting to a world that's totally different.
It's like giving them the tools to build a whole new life. Do you think that actually helps keep them from going back to prison?
Oh, definitely. The research shows that people who get that kind of support are way less likely to reoffend.
And we talked about how it could save money, too. Remind me how that works.
Well, keeping someone in prison costs a fortune, right? Food, housing, medical care, security, it adds up. But if you help people successfully reintegrate and become productive citizens, they're not as likely to end up back behind bars. And that saves the state money in the long run.
Plus, they're working, paying taxes, contributing. That helps everyone.
Exactly. It's a win-win. Second chances, improved safety, and a boost to the economy.
This Second Chance Communities Act is really something else. Bold, innovative, really makes you rethink what justice and rehab mean.
It does. And it's part of this bigger trend in criminal justice reform, focusing on compassion, second chances, recognizing that everyone has worth, everyone has potential.
It's about moving away from just punishment and toward healing, reintegration.
Yeah, it's creating a system that holds people accountable, but also helps them become productive members of society.
And it all goes back to what San Philo's saying in his book, Life Ain't Fair, and what they talked about on that It's a Matter of Time episode. Our justice system, especially here in Florida with all its harsh sentences, needs a serious overhaul.
It's a wake-up call. It makes us question what we think we know and see if there are better, more humane ways to do things.
It's asking those tough questions like, what does justice really mean? Is it just about punishment? Or is it also about rehab, restoration, giving people a chance to make things right?
Right. If we really believe in second chances, are we actually doing what it takes to help people rebuild their lives after they've served their time?
These are important questions. And Philo's book and that podcast episode, they give us a place to start having those conversations. They encourage us to see things differently, to see the humanity in people who've made mistakes, and to imagine a justice system that's truly focused on healing and making things whole again.
So that's our deep dive. We hope you keep exploring these ideas. Check out San Philo's book, listen to that episode of It's a Matter of Time, and most importantly, keep talking about criminal justice reform. It affects everyone, and we can't ignore it.
Absolutely. It deserves our attention, our compassion, and our willingness to believe in a better future. A future where justice isn't just about punishment, but about healing, restoration, and redemption. Thank you for joining us.
I just wanna sit with you, conversate. Tell me what you're with now. What's your fate? And if you gotta get somewhere, don't be late. If you're gonna choose sides, that's your place. Fear is a force, faith is a source, love is
You are listening to A Matter of Time, where we explore better justice options for the people of Florida. Please like, comment, and subscribe.